The courtroom was packed. It wasn't a high-profile case and no celebrities were involved. Yet somehow there was a strange tension in the air, like everyone could feel something important was about to happen. Every seat was filled. Reporters tapped away on their phones, lawyers whispered to their clients, and the hum of murmured conversations filled the space. But the focus that day wasn't on the defendant or the charges. It was on a woman, black, calm, and sharply dressed, who stood at the front of the room holding a folder of papers. No one quite knew who she was, but she carried herself like someone who wasn't afraid of anyone in that room. Sergeant David Kruger, a tall, broad-shouldered officer known for his tough stance and quick temper, stood just a few feet away. His eyes were fixed on the woman like she didn't belong. He didn't like her confidence. He didn't like her silence. And more than anything, he didn't like the fact that she had walked into that courtroom like she owned it. He stepped forward, his boots hitting the wooden floor with heavy thuds. People turned to look. "You need to leave," he said gruffly, standing chest to chest with her. "You're not cleared to be here." The woman didn't flinch. She didn't argue or raise her voice. She simply looked at him, steady and still, as if she knew exactly what he was going to do next. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied. The judge looked up from his bench, a bit confused but not yet alarmed. A few members of the jury glanced at each other, sensing the confrontation was escalating. Kruger didn't wait. He reached forward and placed his hand on her shoulder, preparing to escort her out. That's when it happened. She didn't resist. She didn't shout. Instead, she slowly turned her head toward him and said, "You're making a mistake." "You're going to want to stop now," Kruger scoffed. "Is that a threat?" "No," she replied calmly. "It's a warning." He smirked, clearly not impressed. To him, she was just another woman trying to pull rank where she had none. He gripped her arm a little tighter. Then a loud buzz echoed through the room. It was the courtroom clerk's desk phone. The sound made several heads turn. The clerk answered quickly, whispering something into the receiver. Her face went pale. Her eyes darted to the judge, then to the officer. She stood up. "Your Honor, we just received a call. It's urgent." "From the White House." The judge blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. "Excuse me?" "The White House," she repeated. "They're on the line. They say it's about her." She pointed to the woman still standing silently at the front of the room. Now the entire courtroom was silent. Kruger loosened his grip. Suddenly unsure, the woman glanced at the judge, then back at the officer. "I told you," she said softly. "You're going to want to stop." The judge motioned for the clerk to bring him the phone. The courtroom was still in shock. Everyone watched as the judge listened intently, nodding, eyes wide. After a moment, he looked up slowly, eyes locking with Kruger's. "Sergeant?" the judge said, voice shaking slightly. "Remove your hand from her, now." Kruger pulled back, confused. "What's going on?" The judge didn't answer right away. He was clearly processing the weight of the call. "You just laid hands." "On someone you shouldn't have touched? Someone very important?" Gasps filled the room. The woman didn't move. Didn't blink. And just when the tension seemed unbearable, the courtroom doors swung open again. Another figure entered, tall, suited, with an earpiece and sharp eyes scanning the room. Secret Service. This was no ordinary case, but before anyone could ask who she really was, why she was there, or what power she held, something even more unexpected happened. At that same moment, in a completely different part of the city, a black teenage boy sat on a crowded city bus watching a pregnant white woman struggle to stand. No one offered her a seat. People avoided her gaze. The boy looked around, then stood without a word and gently motioned for her to sit. She smiled in surprise, grateful and touched. "Thank you," she said softly, taking the seat he had given. Up. He nodded, shrugged it off. "No big deal." But it was. When she got off at the next stop, she handed him a folded note and whispered, "Open this when you're alone." He opened it 2 stops later, and what he read changed everything. Back in the courtroom, the woman's identity was finally about to be revealed. But just before the judge could speak, another phone buzzed, this time in the hands of the officer. Himself, he glanced down at the screen. Unknown number. Secure line. He hesitated. and answered. And in that moment, the entire courtroom watched as the blood drained from his face, because the voice on the other end didn't ask who he was. They simply said, "You just touched the wrong woman, Sergeant." Sergeant Kruger stood frozen. The courtroom, just moments earlier, full of murmurs and whispers, was now breathlessly silent. Everyone was watching him, the judge, the jury, the lawyers, even the people in the back row who usually only half paid attention. All eyes were locked on the officer holding the phone to his ear. His posture stiffening with every second that passed, the voice on the other end spoke slowly, clearly, and with authority. Kruger didn't say a word, he just listened. His lips parted slightly, his jaw clenched. He looked at the woman, who still hadn't moved. Her expression hadn't changed. She didn't seem surprised. If anything, she looked patient, as if she knew this exact moment was coming after what felt like a full minute. Kruger finally lowered the phone and slowly ended the call. He stood there, blinking, his hand trembling slightly. Then, without another word, he stepped back away from the woman. His badge suddenly looked smaller, his stance less firm. The confidence he carried just moments before had drained from his face. The judge leaned forward again. "Sergeant, I'm going to ask you one more time. Who is she?" Kruger didn't answer. He glanced at the Secret Service agent now standing at the edge of the courtroom, then back at the woman. She gave him a faint nod, almost like she was giving him permission to speak. "She's with Federal Intelligence?" he finally muttered. "And that call, it came from the Situation Room." Gasps broke out around the room again. No one had expected that. Federal Intelligence? Situation Room? What did that even mean? The judge's hands gripped the edge of the bench. "You're telling me this woman is a high-level government official? Why is she here? Why wasn't this disclosed?" The woman finally stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Because the people I investigate usually don't know I'm coming, and because this courtroom is currently under federal review." Her words landed like thunder. The judge sat back in his seat, trying to process it all. "Review? For what?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she turned toward the gallery, scanning the faces in the courtroom. Misconduct, corruption, discrimination, abuse of authority. Pick one or all of them. Kruger lowered his gaze. He had heard whispers for months, complaints from defendants, lawyers, even fellow officers, but they were always brushed aside, buried in paperwork or drowned out by the system's loud machinery. No one ever expected someone from the highest levels to come knocking. And yet, here she was, still holding the file in her hand. The woman took a deep breath. "Let me be clear. I didn't come to disrupt this courtroom. I came to observe, quietly, but I wasn't even given the chance to sit before someone decided. I didn't belong." The silence that followed her words was painful. Meanwhile, across town, that same teenage boy sat alone at the back of the bus, his hands shaking as he unfolded the note once again. The handwriting was neat, elegant too, clean to be rushed. The message was short but powerful. It read, "You gave your seat without hesitation. That kindness will not go unnoticed. This number will change your life. Call it when you're ready." Below the message was a direct phone number with an area code he didn't recognize. He stared at the note. His name was Jamal, a 17-year-old high school senior who worked nights at a local grocery store to help his mother pay rent. He wasn't used to random acts of luck. His life had been a series of small struggles, nothing dramatic, just a constant balancing act of trying to stay afloat. But that note felt different. Like it wasn't just a thank you. Like it meant something. He pulled out his phone and took a photo of it, just in case. Then he tucked it into his backpack, unsure of whether to believe it or toss it away as a strange moment from a strange day. The woman didn't seem rich or powerful. She just looked tired. But there was something in her voice when she whispered those words to him. Something he couldn't shake. Back in the courtroom, the woman handed her file to the clerk. "Everything you need is in here," she said softly. "Names, records, surveillance footage, testimonies, it's all there." The clerk took it carefully, unsure whether to even touch it. The judge tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. You coordinated this with the White House?" Not just the White House, she replied. This goes deeper than politics. And still, she hadn't said her name. Kruger turned to her again, unable to stay quiet. Why didn't you say something when you walked in? Her eyes met his, steady as before. Because I wanted to see how I'd be treated as just another black woman in a courtroom, not someone with a title, not someone backed by power, just a person walking into a room where justice is supposed to be blind. No one spoke. And that silence said everything. She took a step back and folded her hands in front of her. I didn't need to say a word. You said it all for me. The courtroom doors opened again, this time quietly. 2 more agents stepped. Inside, they didn't speak. They just stood at the sides, watching. A Lear in the front row slowly raised his hand. Excuse me, are you saying this whole trial is now under federal review? What happens next? The woman didn't answer. Instead, she looked back at the judge. Your Honor, I recommend you adjourn for today. This courtroom is no longer operating. Under local authority, the judge's gavel remained still. His face, usually composed and firm, looked shaken. But after a long pause, he nodded. This session is adjourned. He finally said. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room. As people began gathering their things and rising from their seats, the woman didn't move. She remained standing, calm and composed, because this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Outside the building, black SUVs waited, their engines humming low. A motorcade. Journalists began gathering at the steps as news of the White House call started spreading. Inside the bus, Jamal sat quietly, staring at the phone number again. He didn't know that his life had just been tied to a moment across town, that the kindness he'd shown to a stranger was about to pull him into something far bigger than he could imagine. And he had no idea that the woman he had offered his seat to was the same one now turning a city's justice system on. Its head, he took a deep breath, thumb hovering over the keypad. And then slowly, he began to dial. The number Jamal dialed rang only once before it clicked. He expected a robotic voicemail or a long silence. But instead, a calm, professional voice answered immediately. This is Director Langston's line. Who's speaking? Jamal froze. He hadn't thought this far ahead. His fingers gripped the edge of the seat beneath him. The bus hummed beneath him, but the world outside felt like it had gone still. My name's Jamal Harris. I gave my seat to a pregnant lady on the bus. She gave me a note. There was a pause on the line. Not a long one, but just long enough to make Jamal feel like he'd said something wrong. Understood. The voice said, Please hold. Before he could respond, the line clicked again. A different voice came on, female this time. Smooth, controlled. Jamal, she said like she already knew him. We'd been expecting your call. Sent a chill down his spine. Expecting me? But you did the right thing, and sometimes that's all it takes to change the course of your life. Back at the courthouse, the woman had stepped out of the building and into the waiting black SUV. She hadn't said a word to the cameras outside, though reporters were swarming, shouting questions. Who are you? Is this a federal investigation? Did the president personally call the court? She didn't even glance at them. The door closed, the engine hummed, and within seconds the motorcade pulled away. Inside the car, she finally let out a slow breath. It was the first time she'd let herself exhale all day. Director Langston, her assistant said from the front seat. Jamal Harris was on the line, her eyes softened. Patch him through. Back on the bus, Jamal blinked as the voice changed again. Jamal, the woman said, calm and familiar. It's me, he recognized her voice instantly. It's you. From the bus? Yes, she replied. And I need to ask you something important, but first, are you safe? Are you alone? Jamal looked around. The bus was nearly empty now. Yeah, I'm okay. Good, she said. What you did today may seem small to others, but in my world, small actions reveal everything. He didn't know what to say to that. I saw someone who needed a seat. And that's exactly why I picked you. Jamal sat up straighter. Picked me? But before she could explain more, a loud knock at the car window startled her. One of her agents signaled her to roll it down. "We've got a development," he said through the window. There was a data breach on the courthouse Wi-Fi during the hearing. Someone tried to access sealed files. She narrowed her eyes. "Show me." The agent handed her a tablet. The screen showed an internal log. The breach had come from inside the building. Not the public side, but the staff network. Someone had tried to dig into her sealed file. That meant someone in the courtroom knew or suspected who she was before the phone ever rang. And that meant she was being watched long before she entered the building. She turned back to the phone. "Call. Jamal, I'm going to ask you something strange." "Okay. Do you remember if anyone else saw you give up your seat today?" He thought for a second. Yeah. There was this guy, older. He had a newspaper, but I could feel him watching me. He got off a couple stops after her." Her tone turned serious. "Did he say anything?" "No, but he kept looking at her, like he recognized her." She nodded slowly. "You've just confirmed something I needed to know." In another corner of the city, that same man from the bus, a bald, gray-bearded man in a worn trench coat, stood inside a payphone booth with his back to the street. He wasn't just an onlooker. He was a ghost from Director Langston's past. He made a call to an encrypted line. "She's active," he said simply. "Are you sure?" The voice on the other end asked. "She's not hiding anymore. And she's recruiting, just like before." The line went silent. Then, "Do not engage. Just observe. We'll handle it from the top." But the man didn't hang up right away. He stared down the empty street and muttered, "She's 10 steps ahead already. You're not going to handle her. You're going to react too late. Again." In the courtroom, Sergeant Kruger sat in the locker room alone. His radio was off. His badge sat on the bench next to him. He kept replaying the moment in his head, his hand gripping her shoulder. Her warning, the phone call, the judge's face. Everything in him said he had crossed a line. He wasn't a bad man, but years in the force had taught him to trust instinct over protocol. And his instinct had told him to remove her. Now it felt like the biggest mistake of his life. He grabbed his phone and started scrolling through old case files, trying to find a match, anything on her identity. But every search came up blank. She wasn't in any system he had access to. That's when he noticed something strange. A sealed case from 2 years ago suddenly had a new flag on it. A small symbol he didn't recognize, an eagle with a star behind it, federal seal, and it was marked "Sensitive Clearance. Access by permission only." That case involved a whistleblower in a corruption trial. The whistleblower vanished before testifying. Case was buried. No resolution. And now it was linked to her file. He leaned back, heart pounding. "What have I stepped into?" he whispered to himself. The city buzzed around them all. Jamal, the director, the agent from the bus, the judge still sitting stunned behind his bench. None of them knew it yet, but their stories were now tied together by more than coincidence. Director Langston had returned to the field for a reason. Not just to investigate courtroom corruption. Not just to test how she'd be treated as an ordinary black woman in a system built on hierarchy and bias. She had returned because something bigger was unraveling, something that reached all the way to Washington. And the call from the White House that interrupted the courtroom wasn't the last one, because someone far above even her had just found out that she was back, and they were not happy. Jamal stepped off the bus and into the early evening light. The city humming around him, yet everything felt strangely quiet. He could still hear her voice in his head, Director Langston. She'd said his name like she'd known it for years. Like it wasn't the first time she'd spoken it out loud. His phone was still warm in his hand, and the number she'd given him earlier stayed on the screen like a door waiting to be opened wider. He walked slowly down the street, glancing over his shoulder more than once. Something inside him said he was being followed. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the feeling of eyes watching across the street. A black car that hadn't been there earlier idled with its lights off. He didn't want to assume the worst, but a voice in the back of his head kept whispering, "You're part of something now." Meanwhile, inside a dark conference room in D.C., a group of men and women sat around a long, polished table. Screens displayed courtroom footage, photographs, and a dossier with Langston's name stamped across the top in bold red. "She went dark for 3 years," one man said, flipping through papers. "And now she just shows up? On record? In a courtroom of all places?" "She didn't just show up," another woman replied. "She made a move, a very public one. And now half the agencies are scrambling to find out who authorized it. She doesn't need authorization, you know that. Which is exactly what makes her dangerous." One of them pointed at the screen where Jamal's photo had just appeared. "And what's the boy got to do with this?" "We don't know yet," someone else replied. "But she chose him for a reason. She doesn't do anything by accident." Back in the city, Langston sat in her temporary field office, a quiet hotel suite, wired with encrypted lines and secure files. She stared at a wall covered in images. Red strings connecting names, events, and dates. At the center of it all was a man named Warren Pike, former federal prosecutor turned private contractor, known for cleaning up messes for powerful people. And he was connected to the courthouse investigation deeply. The problem was, Pike didn't operate in the open. He was like smoke always present, never traceable. But Langston had chased ghosts before. This one was personal. Her assistant entered quietly, holding a tablet. "We tracked the signal from the courthouse breach. The IP leads to a local address tied to a former officer. Name? Kruger?" She nodded slowly. "Of course." Sergeant Kruger, still seated in his locker room, stared at the case. File he wasn't supposed to open. Inside was something he hadn't expected: photos. One of them was of a younger Langston, standing beside a man in a military uniform. The other man was labeled Deceased, Private Aaron Langston. Her brother, Kruger, swallowed hard. He remembered that name. Years ago, the department had flagged a wrongful death investigation. No one followed up. Files went missing. No one was held accountable. But Kruger had always suspected something was covered up. Now it was clear Langston hadn't come back. For random justice? She was digging into a personal war, and somehow he was now caught in it. He stood, reached for his badge, but stopped halfway. If what he saw in those files was true, the people she was going after weren't just judges and dirty cops. They were bigger, more connected. The kind of people who had reach into courtrooms, prisons, elections, and even the White House. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "An old contact from Internal Affairs. We need to talk," Kruger said. "I think I've been part of something I didn't understand, and someone's going to get hurt if I don't speak now." Jamal, still walking, suddenly stopped as a black SUV rolled up next to him. The window came down slowly. "Jamal Harris?" The driver asked. He hesitated. "Who's asking?" The back door opened. Inside sat Langston. "We need to talk," she said. He got in, the door closed, and the vehicle pulled away into traffic. Inside, Langston looked at him, eyes steady. "They're watching you now. Not because of what you did, but because of who saw you do it." "I don't get it," Jamal said. "I just stood up. I gave someone my seat, that's all." "And that's what scares them," she replied. "You did the right thing when no one else did. That's the kind of person they can't control." He frowned. "Who's they?" She didn't answer. Instead, she handed him a folder. "Read this." Inside were documents he didn't understand, photos, court memos, a list of names with dates and dollar amounts next to them. Bribes, payoffs, false testimonies. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "Because you're going to help me." "Bring them down." His heart thudded in his chest. "Why me?" "Because you still believe in doing what's right." "And because I can't do this alone." In the shadows of another building, the man from the payphone, the gray-bearded watcher, was on the move again. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 other men followed behind him, their pace quick, their eyes alert. "She made contact with the boy," one of them said. "Then we don't have much time." The man replied, "Across the city, alarms were quietly going off, not the kind you hear, but the kind that sends signals to people in power. People who knew that once Langston resurfaced, nothing stayed buried." In a small, windowless room, Warren Pike stood over a table covered in classified folders. He was reviewing everything Langston had touched. "She's pulling threads," his assistant said. And she's close to unraveling the whole thing. Pike didn't look up. Then it's time to cut the thread before it pulls us all down. Back, In the SUV, Langston looked at Jamal again. You don't have to do anything yet. Just stay close, stay alert. And if anyone ever asks you what you know, say nothing. Not until I tell you otherwise. Jamal nodded, but the weight of what he was carrying had already settled in. He was just a teenager. But now he was holding secrets people were willing to silence for. Langston's phone buzzed. She looked down, her expression changing. They made a move, she said under her breath. They're trying to erase the files. She turned to Jamal. We don't have time. I need you to trust me. He didn't speak, he just nodded, and the car turned sharply onto a side street, disappearing into the city's maze as the clock ticked toward something none of them could stop. Moral of the story: doing the right thing even when no one is. Watching can place you at the center of something far greater than you ever imagined. True strength lies not in power or position, but in character, integrity, and quiet courage. In a world full of injustice, the smallest act of kindness can spark a chain reaction that challenges corruption, exposes truth, and changes lives.